Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second panel of Sunday morning's Armadacon. This one is the Terry Pratchett panel. We have the wonderful historians who dug through the archives for these stories, Pat and Jan Harkin, and the moderator, our own writer, Mark.
Thank you. As with the last panel, for those that were here before, just to let you know that this panel is also being recorded on behalf of the publishers of Stroke of the Pen, and this will form a podcast episode surrounding the story behind the book and the book. If you don't wish to appear as a disembodied voice within this podcast, please ask somebody else to ask your question for you. Thank you.
Did anyone tell Pat and Jan that?
Yes, there was an email exchange about this. How much of it they actually read, I don't know.
Well, we passed it on to our people.
Excellent. Did your people then get in touch with their people?
No, because our people don't exist.
Like continuity checkers for the watch.
So, welcome to this panel, which is going to discuss the publication of a new book of Terry Pratchett's short stories, very early short stories, A Stroke of the Pen. But we'll also explore a bit more the story behind how this book came into existence and where these stories have come from and so on. Most of you in the room will know Pat and Jan very well, but for the benefit of anybody who is new, or the benefit of those people that are listening to this later on and don't know Pat and Jan personally, could you just start by saying a little bit about yourselves and what Terry Pratchett and his body of work means to you as people?
I think you should go first.
Oh, okay. Right. Hello, I'm Jan. I have two identities. I'm Dr. Jan Clark, and I'm Mrs. Pat, or Mrs. Harkin, or Dr. Harkin, or whatever else you want to shout down the corridor at me. So I'm quite happy to be called Jan Harkin. We are both medical doctors who have now retired for the last 5 years, and we live in West Yorkshire in North Leeds.
Well, I'm Pat Harkin. Well, without wishing to repeat things, I am a retired medical doctor, as you just found out. And I've been a fan of Terry's and a friend of Terry's for years. 30 years? I don't know.
And I'm his carer.
She's very much the enabler. Without her support, I couldn't do half of the nutcasey things that I do in Discworld and other environments.
So how did you first come across Terry's work and how did it come to mean what it does to you?
Well, I went to school in London and then moved to Yorkshire to go to university and stayed there. But I kept in touch with some school friends. And one summer we went down to visit them for the weekend, stayed with them. And as we were packing up the car to come home, my friend Graham turned to me and said, "Oh, I've just read this, you might like it." And he handed me this book called The Colour of Magic. I took it home and I read it, and I liked it. And then it's all a bit of a blur. But somehow I'm now being interviewed about finding new short stories of Terry. And there's just something about Terry's writing that grabs you, that pulls you right in. If I knew what it was, I'd be writing it myself. But it obviously exists, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the books as well, and you know, I find Terry's writing is it makes you laugh and then it makes you think. As we heard, he has a passion and an anger behind some of these stories, and they are so good. The writing is just superb. So I've read the books. I'm no expert, but I really enjoy them.
So yesterday we had a panel from Mark Burrows who talked a lot about Terry's early career in the newspapers and his work there and how his writing came about. So A Stroke of the Pen is a collection of, they're described on the book cover as lost stories, rediscovered stories perhaps, which Terry wrote before the Discworld series was a thing, as short stories within newspapers, not under his own name.
Well, not usually under his own name. He did occasionally write under his own name.
So how did these stories come to be lost, and how have they come to be rediscovered?
Right. Can we have the
Yeah.
slide?
There are some visual aids to help you, unless you're listening to this as a podcast.
But we can't see them, so it's going to be a bit difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start.
Okay.
And then I'll go a little back a little bit. The trouble with this story is every point you have to say, but actually the story really starts, and go back a bit, and then from there you go. So we had, when we put these first slides together, we had about 6 slides, all of which said, but really the story started earlier than that. Colin Smythe was Terry's first publisher and his agent for many years, and he maintains a website on which he tries to document everything Terry has ever written, fiction and non-fiction, as he can find it. Obviously all the novels are there, but there are lots of little holes in the reporting from earlier years. And Colin was ploughing through papers, filling these in the British Library National Newspaper Archive in Colindale in those days, in
North London.
northwest London. Anyway, about 20 miles from where Colin lived. And then the British Library went and moved. We moved to Boston Spa in Yorkshire. And I think Colin, either we've been suckered, or Colin genuinely didn't know that we lived in Yorkshire as well, because we were talking to him at a convention, and he was bemoaning the fact that this wonderful resource was now far too far away from him. And we said, oh, that's where we live, we could go. What have we done? So before lockdown, we were looking for non-fiction things that Terry had written. He worked for the Central Electricity Generating Board for a while, publicity officer. And they have a magazine called Power News. And it's every bit as exciting as you'd imagine. A typical story would be, ducks are raising a family in the cooling pond at such and such a power station. Or new turbine blade flown in by helicopter. Wonderful stuff. And we would go through, looking at the local drama company did the Ireland thing, so there's a report of that, and Terry's initials at the bottom. Stuff like that. We were slowly going through filling this in, and then lockdown came and that faded. But then Colin rang us one evening. Do you want to take over?
Yeah, he'd been contacted by a fan who'd collected a story, The Quest for the Keys, and loved it so much that he actually cut out all the episodes and framed them. Now, he'd done this so well that he'd actually cut out all notification of which newspaper it was and the dates. You know, very neat. But you can see at the bottom here it says Terry Pratchett, so it's definitely a Pratchett storyline from the newspapers. And this was something that Colin knew nothing of. So this was a little project that he gave us to do, to try and find this story, which clearly had been published, but didn't know quite where. And so we had to sort of devise a bit of a strategy, didn't we?
Yeah, he rang us and said, you know, would you be interested in finding a Terry Pratchett story that nobody else has seen for 50 years? We thought about it for about that long, and we got into it, yeah. Colin gave us a lot of supporting information, where Terry had worked, which newspapers he'd worked for and when. Because this is obviously from a newspaper, but we didn't know which one. The guy who found it couldn't remember when it was. He thought it was, quote, 50 years ago, unquote, which would have been 1972, at which point Terry was working for the Bucks-Free Press. Yeah.
The Western Daily Press
Western Daily
at that
Press.
point.
But anyway, so we had some newspapers that he might have contributed to. We had a time range. We knew that Terry had left school in 1965. It couldn't be before, well, very unlikely before that. The story, I don't think the actual words are on screen, but the action starts off in the city of Morpork. Not Ankh-Morpork, but Morpork. And we thought it was unlikely Terry would reuse the name Morpork if The Colour of Magic had already been published, and we therefore thought our sort of upper end limit would be 1983, 1984, when Colour of Magic hit the presses. And we decided to start at 1965
Yeah, and work our way forward.
We've got some pictures of our prey.
Oh, I've got some pictures of the library. The beautiful St Pancras reading room. Well, the one at Boston Spa is somewhat more modest, but
Still very nice.
very
Very
friendly,
big.
lovely.
Twice the size of this room.
Yeah. Boston Spa is just outside Wetherby, which is 200 miles from London, straight up the A1, and actually contains 75% of the British Library stock. So this is like a big campus place with lots of buildings, but it's a weird environment because there's no people walking around. Even though there are 500 employees, you don't see them. And we live in North Leeds, which is about a 20-minute drive from here, from Boston Spa, yeah. And this is the National Newspaper Archive building. They're quite squat, the buildings on the campus. There's a local law that says that they can't be any taller than a local church spire. So there's this building, and there's another one which also contains newspaper archive, quaintly known as the Additional Storage Building.
Librarians, huh?
Yeah. And you see the sort of scale of this with some cars parked down at the bottom there. So this is what it's like inside. Wow. Yeah, someone described this as library porn because it's wow, librarians love it.
Totally is library.
Absolutely. It's more of a machine than a library. It is robots retrieved from the shelves, and because humans aren't welcome there. There's a 14% oxygen saturation in the atmosphere in the building to prevent paper igniting. So if you took a match in there, you could obviously light the head of the match, but the wood wouldn't catch. Yeah. They don't have sprinklers, I believe, because they don't need them.
They believe they would never need them because the fire couldn't catch, and they would then have a lot of papier-mâché.
Yeah. So so you can't go in there for more than about 20 minutes without breathing apparatus. Yeah. So there's 300 miles of shelving, 60 million items in the newspaper archive. That's out of a total in the British Library of about 170 million items. So it's big, yeah. And the other thing is these robots are clever. They stock according to how often an item is requested. So they'll keep the frequently requested things in a more accessible place than the ones that aren't used so much. So an astonishing bit of machinery. Okay, so yeah, this is the Children's Circle Uncle Jim bit. I think Mark used this. This is the first time we saw the fiction of Terry in the Books Free Press. The week before this, there was an awful piece of writing.
Yeah. If you've either read the book of The Amazing Morris or seen the animation, you'll know that the rats carry with them a child's storybook. Mr. Bunsey Has an Adventure. Yeah. And it's terrible.
Hippity-hoppity.
Yeah, hippity-hoppity down the track went Mr. Bunsey. The week before this is basically Mr. Bunsey. It's that level of writing. And you'll notice that Terry's name isn't on this, it's Uncle Jim. Yeah. Uncle Jim was a placeholder name they just used since the stories had to come from somewhere. They couldn't just appear out of nowhere. Kids asked that question like that. So the junior reporter, or whichever mug had no better excuse, wrote as the name of Uncle Jim. There were Uncle Jims before Terry, there were Uncle Jims after Terry left, and then there are the very special Uncle Jims that are Terry, which are so different and important.
I mean, the week before, was a thing about how smoking was a terrible thing and it was, very bad for you. And then this story is all about how the cigarette ash floated down onto the carpet, and Snibrel was named as well, so it's the carpet people starting off. So here we have a very, very rare picture, and that is of Pat doing some work. When we walked into the reading room as a pair of researchers, kindly allowed us a side room so that we could talk, and the little sort of squeaks of enthusiasm when we found Terry's work wouldn't disturb the other readers. This is in the reading room side room, and there's a couple of stations there. You can see the sort of size of the volumes that we were planned through. Again, you saw some of this in Mark's talk.
So if you would like to know how to find a lost literary masterpiece, I run a masterclass in this. It goes like this. Turn the page. Scan the page. Make a note. Turn the next page. Scan the next page. Make a note. Turn the page. I think you're beginning to get the hang of it. You're obviously your naturals. On the other hand, it was wonderful and exciting because we knew that this treasure, the quest for the keys, was buried in their summer. But otherwise, dear Lord, it was boring.
Yeah, but I mean, we had to do it systematically, though, didn't we? You've been involved in setting up spreadsheets before.
Oh, yeah, I did a cataloguing project at the university. I learned the hard way that it is better to collect information you don't need than to not collect something and then halfway through have to stop, go right back to the beginning and start again. So we were recording everything, which newspaper it was, which date, which page. One of the newspapers had the volume numbers and serial numbers, which page the stuff was on. Colin even wanted to know where on the page an article was. And we collected enormous amounts of information. Now, this is incredible hard work. I'll just say that you're seeing some incredible hard work going on there. But it's not something that two people can really work together on. It just takes one person to scan a page. So we would take different volumes of newspapers. If you've got some of them, there we go. This is our raw material. Those things are as big as a broadsheet newspaper and must weigh 10 or 15 pounds. Yeah. So we would decide that today we are doing 1970 for the Buck Street Press, starting in January. I'd get the January volume. Jan would get the February volume. We would work independently. At the end of the afternoon, we would collate our findings.
There was a little bit on microfilm, but it actually was very tiring and difficult to use, because by the time you'd sort of focused down on the text, you'd lost track of where you were on the pages and so on. So very little of this was on microfilm, and none of it had been digitised.
Which you think is the laser pointer?
I think it might be on the side, not sure.
That's forward and backwards. Well,
Anyway.
that is microfilm. The little reel of stuff. Yeah, we hate the microfilm. It's terrible stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at the end of the afternoon.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just saying that we used this to correlate, didn't we? To make sure that we were picking up on stuff that we knew about already. So they were on Colin's website. So this is one which is bylines in the Western Daily Press with Terry's name, and that was already known about. So we knew that we were on the right sort of track for searching. So then we'd be correlating things through the day.
Yeah. And then after we'd been doing this for about 3 weeks or a month, something like that, at the end of one afternoon, we were putting our findings together. Jan was reading out to me what she'd found, and she read out The Blackberry Thing, a story called The Blackberry Thing by Patrick Cairns. And I filled it into my spreadsheet. She said, no, you spelt it wrong. It's not blackberry as in the fruit, it's blackberry. And I thought, well, hang on. That rings a bell. The Johnny Maxwell books are set in Blackberry. And so are some of the other children's stories. Interesting. But this is Patrick Cairns. This is not Terry Pratchett. And then I looked at the text, and it mentioned that it was the town of Blackberry in the county of Gritshire. I thought, oh, I'm sure that's it. So I dug up my Kindle, did a quick search through the Pratchett books, and yeah, Gritshire is a place name that Terry used. Our first thought was, this is something new, this is something exciting. Our second thought was, actually, it's probably just a coincidence, because Blackberry, it's not that great a literary invention. I can imagine any reporter doing it. Gritshire was a bit more suggestive, but actually bits of Derbyshire are referred to as Gritshire.
And also, as we saw with Uncle Jim, that there may have been a universe that the junior reporters were expected to stick with for their stories.
Yeah. Everybody who writes for Doctor Who knows about the Daleks, even though they didn't invent them. And it was quite possible the junior reporters in the Books Free Press had, the Western Daily Press had a little universe in which they set their stories and they shared. But we thought, we'll ask Colin's advice. So I took some pictures, I emailed them to Colin, and he rang us back within about 10 minutes, saying, the style is definitely Terry, and what I know that you don't know is that Cairns was his mother's maiden name. And you can argue that Patrick and Pratchett are too distantly related. Terry Pratchett, Patrick Cairns. And at that point we could have done with the soundproofing from the library.
Yes, there was not, yes, yeah. So then we went back and rechecked, and we found several more stories, and then we sat down and we went right back to the beginning and we checked again for Cairns all the way through to try and find how many stories there might be.
Because we had seen several Cairns stories but hadn't made the connection at that point.
And that was very, very exciting. But if you remember back to the beginning of this talk, we had a little project.
We'd found all these new Patrick Cairns short stories. We hadn't found the thing we'd actually been sent to look for. The quest for the keys was still out there. We'd searched everywhere at this point from 1965 through to 1974, I think. The Cairns stories were becoming very thin, and then we kept searching. We did about another 7 years and found nothing.
Well, actually, one of the things that we knew about was that there were a lot more children's stories around Christmas and around, you know, like the school holidays and stuff. So one of the things that we did find, probably, yes, here, is the Christmas Eve edition of the Western Daily Press for 1970. And at this point, Terry was allowed to do some feature articles. And here we see a very young man wandering down Bristol High Street dressed as one of the three wise men, looking for gold, frankincense and myrrh.
In boots.
Yeah, in a little feature of a very young Terry. But then I had a little look at the right-hand corner of that page, and there is A Partridge in a Post Box by Patrick Cairns. So not only did he have a feature article, he also had one of his stories in that page.
Yeah, he was competing for page space with himself.
So yeah. So then we had a little fallow point, didn't we? Because we kept on looking and looking and looking. Well,
And we were about to get, we got as far as 1983, which we thought is that's the publication date for The Colour of Magic. That's our likely update. It must be a different newspaper. But we'll give it one more year. We'll just have one last go. Yeah, just one more try.
one more try.
Yeah. And then we were
Here
sat
we go.
there, and
It was Monday the 30th of July 1984 that we spotted the first episode of The Quest for the Keys, 1984. And there were a whole series of these daily in the summer holidays for the children, a total of 36 instalments, and then twice weekly in September to finish it off. And there was a quiz, and you could win a tent if you... Right.
4 people did, but data protection means we can't tell you their names.
So eventually, yes, we did manage to find it. So we got the Patrick Cairns and the other stories.
And you can see in the first paragraph of that one there, The Quest for the Keys. Far away and long ago, when dragons still existed and the only arcade game was ping pong in black and white, a wizard cautiously entered a smoky tavern in the evil, ancient, foggy city of Morpok.
Cycled up to that. Yeah. So we actually ended up finding 3 things. We had been sent for The Quest for the Keys, which was known to exist. Colin had physical bits of it in his house. It was that. We found Patrick Cairns. stories which we hadn't been looking for because nobody knew they existed. But there's a third one, and it's the smallest of the things we found, but somehow it's the one I'm proudest of, in that Colin had told me several years ago that there was a lost Pratchett story. There was a story called Mr. Brown's Holiday Accident. It's about a man called Mr. Brown who goes on holiday, and I don't want to spoil it for you. Anyway, it was serialised in 5 parts. The first 4 were printed, and then a week's print run was lost due to industrial action, which was not uncommon in the early 70s. Usually, however, the serials were just carried over to the next printing. So it was May the 1st, 8th, 15th, 22nd of 1972. And then there is no copy of the 29th of May edition in the archives. And in fact, the next one along, the 6th of July edition, has written on the front page in pencil, 29th of May, NP, not printed. So it was assumed that this story had just fallen through the cracks. It should have been published in the next issue, which just said, sorry, there's no story this week. And therefore, we have a Pratchett story, and it's lost. Now, you probably didn't notice, but on some of the pages, some of the stories that Terry wrote had titles associated with them. That was the Western Daily Press put titles on the stories, whereas the Books Free Press didn't. They were just like Uncle Jim, and here's this week's story. If you look at Colin's website, they've all got titles so that you can sort of refer to them easier rather than saying the story that was printed on July the 9th or whatever. You can actually say whatever the title was. And the way we were working was that whenever we found anything, we would photograph the hell out of it. The page number, the full page, any images, any graphics. And at the end of the evening, of course in the phone these just become image 4279356, 4279357 and so on. In the evenings I would sit down and methodically go through them and rename them. So we would have, Mr. Bunty Has an Adventure Part 1 of 5 and date. And for the Books Free Press ones, I needed to get the official titles from Colin's website. So I had Colin's website up on one screen on my computer, my JPEG viewer on the other, and I would go through and update everything. And I was going through this particular set of images, and I went to Colin's site, and it said, this was never printed. What? No, it was, it's just over there. It said, no, this was lost. I'm making there's a dialogue. Colin wasn't there. But Colin had told me this didn't exist, and his website said it didn't exist. But I've got it on this screen. So I turned around and knocked my mouse, and all the windows went and disappeared. And I expanded them all back up again. Couldn't find it. And I went back to Colin's website, and it doesn't exist. I said, it doesn't exist, and I can't find it. I can't have imagined it. Can't have imagined it. So went back to the phone, sorted everything into chronological order, and just worked through the whole series of things again. And there it was. It wasn't in the Books Free Press. It was in the Midweek Daily Press, because on May the 29th, the Midweek, so many newspapers.
Yes, the Books Free Press was actually given as a free supplement in the midweek free press that week. Why, we don't know. But it was a 24-page supplement of the midweek press, and that's where the story was.
So the archive have a copy, but it is stapled inside the wrong newspaper. If you want to go and find it, you have to go and find the June edition of the other one. But there we have it. We finally have the missing part. The one known loss in Terry's canon has been patched up, and that's the one that pleases me.
So you went back to Colin at that point, and his reaction was...
You don't know.
And his reaction was...
He was very, very pleased, because again, he's like me, he's a completist. He likes to see everything.
And he was fortunate that we started at 65 and worked forward. I mean, if we'd started at 84 and worked backwards, we would have found this in a trice, and that would be our project finished.
Yeah, we'd have given up and gone home. We were sent to find the quest for the keys. Here's the quest for the keys, go. Thanks, goodbye. The Patrick Scan stuff would still be unknown. Mr. Brown's holiday accident would be unfinished.
So where do you go from here? You now have this collection of stories out. Colin knows about them. So what's the path then from there to Doubleday publishing a stroke of pen?
Well, unlike many libraries I've been in, there is no photocopier in the British Library. It's all, you have to photograph what you want. So all the photographs that we had of relevance went to Colin, and then we heard nothing for quite a long time. I mean, we knew they might.
We know nothing about how books are put together. We know you go into a bookshop and you buy them, and that's how you get them. We know where books come from. Mummy and Daddy taught us that. But whether what we had found was enough to make a book or a thin pamphlet or whatever, we had no idea. So we just handed it all over to Colin, and then the way I tend to phrase it is all of a sudden nothing happened.
For a whole year.
For a whole year.
Yeah.
And then again the phone rang, and it was, I've just been told the publishers are about to announce that there will be a new book, so get ready for
get your
prepare
social
for battle.
Yeah.
Yes, get your socials ready, that's what you said. Let's go look that up. So, what was going on behind the scenes, we don't know, because we weren't involved. We had done our job, we had done our duty.
And then suddenly you got very busy again once it reached the stage where the book had been announced, I guess.
Yeah, we got a lot of calls, radio interviews mostly.
Yeah, and a couple of, Mark interviewed us for Big Issue, and Reader's Digest interviewed us. I didn't know
That's how you know you've made it to the big time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we went on Radio Leeds for the morning show and things like that. It was quite fun. And it was so very touching when we saw Colin's intro. That was really, really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the first we knew was when a proof copy turned up in the post.
Yeah, and the proof copy, which I also have a copy of from reviewing it for the publisher, is essentially just if you just lifted the text out of these and put them in here, then that's what you get, with a lot of things that say artwork to follow. So there is now a beautifully illustrated version of this. How many people have got a copy of Stroke of Pen so far? One being waved at me. Okay, so there's a couple of you that already have a copy. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, those of you that do, that it's very easy to see Terry's influence in these stories, and you can kind of see the seeds of Discworld being sown in some of them. Is there anything that particularly stood out for you, reading through these, that you thought, I can see where this went later on in Terry's writing?
In one of the stories, Fossil Beach, the protagonists find a cottage, and in the cupboard under the stairs is a porthole to the Cretaceous period. It's not that far from climbing through the window to get to the Lost Continent, however many books later.
I think the way that he deals with bureaucracy in the Blackberry Weather is just absolutely very
That was written by a man who has sat as the junior reporter at the back doing the notes at far too many council meetings.
Yeah.
And I think there are some ideas behind Unseen University probably in some of these as well. It's been
yes,
Well, the Quest for the Keys has got a lot of more Tolkien bits in there.
Yeah, the Quest for the Keys must have been written around the same time as Colour of Magic, Light Fantastic. So that's the writing of a man who's already had 3 books published. The others, the short stories, are the writings of a junior reporter who's finding his way. It's still worth reading. I think they'd make lovely bedtime stories.
Yeah, and they're all nice short stories. They're just a few pages long each, but even from the titles of some of them, you can see the potential of what you're going to get. Obviously, How Good King Wenceslas Went Pop for the DJ's Feast of Stephen. The Haunted Steamroller, I think, is a great title.
I like that one.
I think The Haunted Steamroller is great. Yeah. Okay, so we're probably approaching the stage where we ought to invite anybody who has questions to grill Pat and Jan about this whole process and so on. And David.
Yes, this quest for the keys, are you going to write it up as an epic adventure story?
It's in the book. It's in the back page.
Yeah.
It's not, if you've read the proof copy, it's not in the proof copies. It's not in the audio book, but it is in the back of the printed
But
copy.
it's a couple of back pages, I mean a whole book.
Oh,
It's an epic adventure.
Oh, I don't
the
know.
quest for the quest for the quest for the keys.
Well, I have to think about that, because we've got nothing to do now.
Or we could write it up as a Dungeons and Dragons module. You are confronted by a publicist. You must roll 3D.
The librarian is angry you stole his copy.
Would you say that the earlier of these stories, are they on the same lines as Crumbling Castle and the Witch's Battery, that kind of quality?
Yes, I mean they were written, some of them around about the same time.
Yeah.
The reason that they didn't get included in those earlier compilations is that we didn't know they were Terry's. So if you imagine the Terry stories, the Cairn stories are just interdigitated in between them. So they're very much of the same style, because they are written by the same person with the same level of experience.
I mean, he was a junior reporter, and I suspect he had a limitation on space for his stories too. So some of them are short, some of them are a bit longer, and that may be why, you know, maybe there's pressure on space for a week. Who knows?
Once you found the Ken link, did you have to go back through and read all of the other dubious Uncle Jims just in case he wrote under any other name?
Well, the Uncle Jim, they gave neither title nor attribute, nor writer name, so it would have meant reading them. And there are limits to what we'll do.
Quest for the future.
But Colin already knew about those. Terry had disclosed them, so it's unlikely that they're in there. It is one of the things on the list of what should we do if we ever decide to look a little bit deeper, scratch a little bit further in. Are there any other newspapers in the area that he was working for, that he might have worked for, that he was, whatever I don't know what the phrase would be, but he was submitting to one paper while working for another?
Well, it was common protocol then to work under a pseudonym if you were publishing in another newspaper away from your home base. But I mean, you know, the options are just huge. It could be a national paper, it could be another regional paper. And of course the regional papers were the internet at the time. I mean, there was no other source of information. So there were lots and lots of regional papers.
Every council meeting, every football result, they were all there. These fucking great newspapers. Was it Hampton?
Yeah, Alice.
I'm just having this thing going through my head. You know that there are popular things where the NASA will get people to decide whether something looks like a galaxy or not, and then forward all the yes, it maybe be to an expert to then sift further. I'm picturing something like that where you divvy out Bucks Free Presses, etc., to all of us. That we get one each, and we go, oh, that feels a little bit Terry, what do you think? And then we've done an issue for you.
Sort of the Pratchett SETI.
Crowd
Is it Terry at home?
Right. Well, once you've got it up and running, do let us know, and we'll
I think that would be feasible when they digitise this
Yeah.
particular
Yes.
bit, you know?
Yeah,
And they haven't got there yet.
So these are not in the British newspaper archives, digitised?
They're
No.
not digitised.
papers?
they are physical copies.
Yeah.
There is a project to digitise all Britain's newspapers, and they've digitised some, but nothing of the area that we were interested in. And when you do look at them, the OCR isn't brilliant.
We know this from doing research. So
Yeah.
Tracy, for example, has been researching witch stories in our area, and we have lots of stories about witches, but we also have stories about watches, and a lot of horse racing stories.
Yeah, but that's because it's part of the word Shazam a bitch.
Yeah.
There's also, there's watches, Mr. Beach, he appears quite a few times.
Yeah. So OCR is not your friend in terms of digitised newspapers.
It's like looking at code, because you can't even tell when it comes up on the screen what you're looking at, because it's just essentially a jumble of random letters and symbols which may occasionally have one word of English in it. So it's very hard to use.
So for this kind of work, there is nothing better than just sitting in front of the materials and physically going through them.
And I can recommend the canteen at the British Library if you want to go along.
Well, they're doing up the whole site. They're building another newspaper archive building, at least, and there's also a visitor centre going in. So they've also acquired a beautiful old building in the middle of Leeds, and I'm not quite sure what they're going to do with that. But yeah, there's certainly expansion, so it might be even more user-friendly at Boston Spa.
There was an old mill building,
Yeah,
and they used to keep sheep on the roof.
this is in Leeds, yeah,
In Leeds city centre.
near the railway station.
Sheep on the roof.
Well, and they didn't get in the way because they'd be in the way if they were on the pavement.
Yeah, exactly.
That looks good.
Any other questions from the floor?
I've got one question, but it kind of relates to a talk that Pat previously did.
That's fine.
Okay.
You did a talk a few years ago, I'm not going to say how many, about diseases you no longer have to diagnose. Are there very many more of those now, or is it something that's accelerating, or is it something that's getting less?
It's difficult to put. There are. We've been having some new diseases, mentioning no names. Monkeypox. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are getting new stuff in. For the, I think for the talk was called The Good Old Days. It was about the diseases we don't get to see anymore. And it reflected the fact that we had undergone a phenomenal change in the medical environment, simply from better sanitation, drier housing, but also improvements in diagnosis and treatment and prevention. So there were things that were going away. I think we've probably come to the bottom of that decline curve, and the things that we've still got, we're never going to get rid of with foreseeable technology. So my great-grandchildren, should they go into pathology, will still be seeing cases of TB and cases of lung cancer. But there may be fantastic treatments for them.
Bringing this back round, before we come back round full circle and finish off with the last bit about the stroke of the pen. In the previous panel that we've just had here, we're talking about using folklore and mythology in fiction and things like this. And I wanted to ask you about that aspect of Terry's writing, as far as you're able to answer. Knew Terry for a long time. Jacqueline Simpson, one of the UK's most prominent and lovely and frankly eccentric folklorists. I know Jacqueline very well, she's a lovely lady. Every time she walks past me, she doesn't get out anymore, she's in her 90s, but she used to, every time she walked past me in the Folklore Society offices, just after I'd published Black Dog Folklore, she used to just turn around and bark at me. No conversation, she would just bark at me and then walk off. She's lovely.
That's rough.
Thank you. Pat is available for children's parties. What can you say about Terry's research and the way that he worked with people like Jacqueline for his writing?
Every minute of every day was research for Terry. Everything just went in. And sometimes it stayed there, sometimes it came back out onto the page whenever he needed it. You had to be quite careful what you said around Terry. And 2 years later he would say, "You said such and such, but actually it's such and such." What? I don't remember that, you know. Oh, he did. Yeah.
Well, you had some interesting phone calls with him though, when he was looking from your point of view, from research.
He would specifically go to people he knew had interest in various areas. So he rang me up one day and said, "How much strength would it take to pull somebody's head off?" I didn't know, and I felt bad about it. Well, I should know this. Terry wants to know. I should know that. No idea. I'll see if I can look it up. So I went away and I looked it up and I came back and gave the results to him. And the answer is no human being has the strength to tear off another human being's head. Because basically you tear your own arms apart from the effort. He said, "Oh, but it's not a human being, it's an orc." At this point, orcs have not been in Discworld. An orc? Yeah. Well, an orc's a fictional creature, so if you're writing it, and you want it to be strong enough to tear off somebody's head, then it can be. You know, whatever you write is the right answer. It's like, no, that. But I want it to be the right answer.
It's got to be feasible.
So it's got to, it's got to be consistent with what we know of reality and fantasy. He didn't like the with the wave of the magic wand, it was all better again.
Yeah.
You had to work things out. There was no free lunch in a Terry Pratchett plot.
And certainly his use of real world folklore is excellent, and Jacqueline obviously had a big influence in that. I think they met, correct me if I'm wrong, in a signing queue, is that right? And it was after a discussion about magpies and the One for Sorrow rhyme.
Yeah, Terry had realised that there is more than one version of the magpie rhyme. So at a signing queue, he was just asking people, how many versions do you know? And most people were saying one, or some people might say two or three, and then this lady came to the queue, and they asked her, and she said, about 14, I think. And that was how we met Jacqueline, and they got on like a house on fire. He brought her down to Incanton for one of the Incanton events. We were sat in Bernard Pearson's kitchen. Possibly drink had been taken, I couldn't possibly comment. And it was time to go. And Terry said to Jacqueline, so, what do you think of the fans? She said, it's very different from life at the university. Which I said, not so much academia as macadamia. Terry went, yeah, they're all nuts. Wow. I set him up, Terry, you whack him out.
Yeah, she was a fantastic influence on his writing in that respect, for sure. Okay, we need to close this off, I think. So, for those that haven't got a copy of Stroke of the Pen, is now available from Doubleday, Penguin Random House Publishers. And really, if you're a fan of Terry's writing in any way, shape or form, you're not going to be able to, complete and get a full picture of the kind of body of work that he did without reading some of these stories. His later brilliance in the Discworld novels still absolutely shines through, I think, doesn't it, in these earlier stories in many and varied ways. I would encourage anybody who is a fan to seek out a copy for sure. So with that in mind, I think we'll close this off. Please show your appreciation to everybody.